Has anyone ever noticed just how many similarities Punk Hazard has in common with Thriller Bark? Let me explain. So, in Thriller Bark, we have a modified island turned into a ship from the West Blue, right? Well, Punk Hazard itself is a modified island because it was once a government research island, but then after the Battle of Sakazuki and Kuzan, the island was changed forever. One half permanently a tundra, the other half a burning wasteland. With that being said, both arcs have weird connections to Wano, because in both arcs, a samurai is a big plot point. In Thriller Bark, we have Shimmonsuke Ryuma, or at least his zombie, who is being powered by Brook's shadow. He is the reason why Brook cannot leave the island, because he is holding his shadow. This is also the first time we are introduced to anything Wano related in the series. Following that, with Punk Hazard, we have a warrior from Wano named Kinemon. Kinemon has been affected by Dofru as well because he was cut up by the powers of Law's Op Fruit. So in both cases, you have a samurai under the influence of a Dofru, you could say, because Ryuma is being powered by Brook's shadow through the use of the Shadow Fruit, and Kinemon has been affected by Law's Op Fruit. But oddly, Brook ends up fighting both of these samurai in their respective arcs, and these fights make a very cool map of Brook's power progression throughout the series, because he fights Ryuma in the Thriller Bark arc, and he fights Kinemon's torso in the Punk Hazard arc. However, the interesting part about this is that Ryuma was always stronger than him in the Thriller Bark arc, despite being a corpse with his shadow. However, a big sticking point about his strength was that when he performed Brook's techniques, they will come out way stronger than what Brook was capable of, because one of his thrusts came out like a gun blast, which is something Brook was not able to do at that time. However, once Punk Hazard rolled around, while Brook was fighting Kinemon's torso, he performed the same thrusting maneuver, and it came out like a gun blast. Therefore, Brook had reached the level of Ryuma at that point, or at least Ryuma's corpse, as we saw in Thriller Bark. On the subject of antagonists, we have Caesar Clown from Punk Hazard and Gecko Moria from Thriller Bark. Both of these characters are very similar, as both of them are pale, horned fellows with dark lips and purple hair. What's so interesting about them is that both of them have some relationship with gas, as Caesar Clown ate the Logia type devil fruit known as the gas fruit, allowing him to turn into gas. Then we have Gecko Moria with the Paramecia type devil fruit known as the Shadow fruit, which allows him to turn shadows into matter. His own shadow, Doppelman, has assumed 3 states of matter throughout the course of the Thriller Bark arc, as we see it become a solid, a liquid, and a gas. What's also so interesting about this too, going back to Caesar Clown, is that when he assumes a weird gaseous monstrous state, he looks a little bit like Doppelman. But on top of that, both of these arc antagonists eat something outside of themselves that is related to their ability to become a big, hulking, massive version of themselves. With Gecko Moria, he eats every shadow on the island of Thriller Bark that once inhabited a zombie. Then, after eating the Shinokuni gas that Caesar Clown created earlier on in the arc, he too becomes a big, hulking mass of gas. But what's also so interesting about these two is that both of them use gadgets in how they fight in conjunction with their Delphin abilities. Gecko Moria has twin scissor blades that can combine together to make a pair of scissors, of which he can use to cut a shadow from a target. Then Caesar Clown uses a variety of gadgets in combination with his Gasgat Fruit abilities to create some very interesting results, such as the Gastonets, which he can fill with gas to cause an explosion, or the Blue Sword technique, of which he uses a weird modified lighter-like sword heal in order to produce a blue flame sword via the oxygen he has collected. What's also quite interesting about these two is that they have the same number of subordinates, because Gecko Moria had Absalom, Hogback, and Perona, right? Whereas Caesar Clown had Law, presumably Monet, and Virgo. Okay, so both of them had 3 underlings. These underlings compare very weirdly to one another because both Hogback and Law are doctors, particularly surgeons. Then you have Monet and Perona. Both of them are Devil Fruit users who have the power of flight through some way or another, with Monet being a harpy thanks to the power of the Op Fruit, and Perona thanks to her ability to astral project and become a ghost. Both of them too have the ability to affect a person upon touch in a way, because Perona's ghosts, when they fly through someone, they make them depressed, whereas Monet can make people sleepy upon touch. Then on top of that, even though Monet isn't wearing a crown nor has anything to do with bears, her sister Sugar is wearing a bear hood and wears a crown on top of that hood. Perona wears a crown and often carries around a bear and was friends with a bear zombie called Kumasi. Additionally, both of them have size-altering capabilities. Perona, through the use of astral projection through the power of her Hollow Fruit, can become a giant, whereas Monet, being a Logia with the power of the Snow Fruit, can turn herself into a big snow harpy monster. But off of that, both of them also are related to the color white, as Perona's ghosts are white, and of course Snow is white. But oddly, there's another very interesting comparison between the two, because a joke that Perona performs ends up actually being Monet's downfall, because in the Thriller Bark arc, Perona jokes that she can strangle Usopp's heart via her ghost powers through the use of astral projection. However, this is not true. However, when we get to Punk Hazard, Monet's demise is through having her exposed heart stabbed by Caesar Clown after it was removed via the use of the Op Fruit abilities. So that's very interesting that these two characters have that correlation. But when you move on to Virgo and Absalom, they actually have a lot in common, which is weird. Both of them have extremely built bodies. Virgo through the use of arm and hockey, and Absalom through the use of animal grafting thanks to Hogback. But also, both of them have projectile attacks, as Virgo shoots a projectile out of his bamboo stick, and of course, through the use of the Clear Fruit, Absalom has invisible hand cannons attached to his wrists. But on top of that, they end up being inverses of one another, because while Absalom can literally hide from view due to the use of his Clear Fruit abilities, Virgo hides in plain sight, making his true intentions unknown until it's time to strike, because he was in the ranks of the Marines as a vice admiral until it didn't suit him anymore, and he revealed that he was actually a member of the Don Quixote family the entire time. So while Absalom was literally invisible, Virgo was invisible by hiding in plain sight. So when talking about subordinates, both arcs, Thriller Bark and Punk Hazard, have a large number of subordinates that all have origins based in some sort of Devil Fruit effect, and they see the main antagonist of the arc as a master. So in Thriller Bark, you have the various zombies, whom were technically made by Hogback, but are powered by the use of Moria's Shadow Fruit abilities. And because of the effects of the Shadow Fruit, all zombies eventually see Moria as their master, overriding all personality that once existed in the shadow. Then, with Punk Hazard, you have various fake fantasy creatures in the forms of centaurs, satyrs, and a harpy, and most of them see Caesar Clown as a master. But then this leads us into both arcs having a large rampaging monster whom is red that ends up boosting the main antagonist of the arc in some way. So in Punk Hazard, you have Smiley, and in Thriller Bark, you have Ors. Both Ors and Smiley are big red beasts that are powered by devil fruits in one way or another. Ors is powered by Luffy's Shadow thanks to the use of Gecko Moria's Shadow fruit abilities, and Smiley is powered by the Sara model Axolotl fruit fed to H2S gas that was cultivated by Caesar Clown. What is so interesting about both of them is that Gecko Moria eats every shadow on the island, including the one inside Ors, to become his Shadow Asgard state. Then Caesar Clown feeds a piece of candy to Smiley, turning it into Shinokuni gas, killing it, but then later on the arc, Caesar Clown eats that Shinokuni gas and becomes a big hulking gas monster of some sort. But on the topic of devil fruit lore in One Piece, both Thriller Bark and Punk Hazard are very important because they both have very significant contributions to what has already been known about devil fruits, because through users like Brook, Moria, and Perona, you really get to see how abstract devil fruits can get in the series. Like, some can bring somebody back after death no matter what. And then in Moria's case, you have devil fruits that can affect a person's place in reality, as when Moria removes a shadow from someone, they are now susceptible to being burned up by the sun. And then with Perona, you have someone who can actually affect the mood of a person, which hadn't been a power at that point just yet in the series when it came to devil fruit abilities. But then moving over to Punk Hazard, for the first time we find out that devil fruits can be replicated in a way with the whole idea of the smile. And then further off of that, we find out that even mythical Zoan fruits can be replicated when we are introduced to Momonosuke and how he got his devil fruit powers. But continuing from that point, with the characters who are present in both arcs, some very similar beats occur. Both arcs contain two warlords. With Bark, you have Gecko Moria and Bartholomew Kuma, but in Punk Hazard, you have Trafalgar Deepwater Law and Don Quixote Doflamingo. Both situations with all four of these characters have something to do with Blackbeard at one point or another in their respective arcs, because in Thriller Bark, Bartholomew Kuma visits Gecko Moria and tells him that Marshall D. Teach, otherwise known as Blackbeard, has become a warlord with a bounty of 0. But then over in Punk Hazard, near the end of the arc, Don Quixote Doflamingo comes onto the scene and attacks Smoker. However, he is stopped by Kuzan. At this point, Kuzan had become a Blackbeard pirate. But in addition, and this is going to lead us into our last point, but both arcs have giants. Said giants are unknown quantities in the series at the time of their reveal. So, in Thriller Bark with Ors turned out to be an ancient giant. We did not know that at the time and have been getting further and further context about what an ancient giant is up until recent day as of this recording with Elbaf. However, in Punk Hazard, we were introduced to the Yeti Cool brothers. We still do not know what the Yeti Cool brothers were. I've done a video on that discussing what they might be, but at the time of this recording, we don't know what kind of giant that they are. All we know is that they are giants. This leads us into both arcs having something to do with the Yonko, formerly known as Kaido. So both arcs end up being preludes to what we eventually see in Wano with Kaido, because first off with Thriller Bark, we are introduced to ancient giants through Ors, and of course we are introduced to Kaido through Moria officially, as Kaido has a personal relationship with Moria because it's because of Kaido that Moria fell so hard. And Moria references this a few times in the arc, claiming that he would use ores to become Pirate King. But what's so interesting about this is that in Punk Hazard, we also find out some things about Kaido because the entire operation being conducted in Punk Hazard is for Kaido's smile fruits that turn people into freakish Zoan abominations. However, what's so funny about this is that in Punk Hazard, due to the powers of the Op fruit, we are given freakish animal abominations in the forms of centaurs, satyrs, and a harpy. But then when we actually get to Wano and see Kaido's forces, this theme is repeated because not only do we get to see animal freaks, including a centaur in speed when we are introduced to more and more smile fruits, but we are also introduced to Kaido's forces. And among those forces, we have the numbers. The numbers are ancient giants like Ors, whom were brought back or revived by Vegapunk in some fashion. It's never really well explained. But yes, both cases involve the eventual endpoint of Kaido and his forces. What's also a very sort of theoretical point is that Onis could have been a prelude in Thriller Bark through Moria himself, because Moria most likely is an Oni like Kaido. But with that being said, give me your thoughts and tell your friends about Polypede. What?